I need you to stop everything you are doing right now. Because what I am about to tell you is not something you stumbled upon by accident. You did not find this message. This message found you. And there is a difference, a profound, life-altering, eternally significant difference between the two. There are people who are watching this right now who have been living under a weight they cannot name, a heaviness that has followed them through every season, through every attempt to move forward, through every prayer, through every declaration of faith. And they have started to ask a question that breaks the heart of heaven to hear. They have started to whisper quietly in the darkest corners of their private moments, am I still chosen? Did God forget about me? Was I ever really included in the promise? My friend, heaven heard that question, and heaven sent this moment as the answer. You are not here by coincidence. The God who holds every galaxy in the hollow of his hand, the God who breathed words into existence with a single word, the God who knew your name before he formed the first mountain, that God arranged this exact moment, this exact second, this precise intersection between your hunger and this truth, because you are standing at the threshold of something that your mind is not yet equipped to fully process, but your spirit already knows is real. Let me tell you what the enemy has been trying to do to you. He has been working methodically, patiently, strategically to convince you that your best days are behind you, that the window has closed, that the promise was for someone else, that you waited too long, that you missed the moment, that the chosen season passed while you were still trying to heal from your last disappointment. And the most dangerous part is, some of you almost believed him. But I want you to look at where you are right now. You, with everything you have been through, the betrayals, the failures, the nights when hope felt like a foreign language, you are still here, still watching, still leaning in, still reaching for something your spirit refuses to let go of. That is not stubbornness, that is not desperation, that is the fingerprint of God on your life. Because chosen people do not quit, they cannot. Something in them, something placed there before they were born, keeps rising, keeps pushing, keeps pressing toward the very thing the enemy has worked so hard to convince them. What is coming next in your life is not a small thing. It is not a slight improvement. It is not a minor adjustment to your current circumstances. What heaven has been preparing behind the scenes of your waiting, what has been being constructed in the invisible realm while you were living through the visible pain, is something so complete, so precise, so perfectly designed for who you are and what you were created to do, that when it arrives, you will not have words for it. You will only have tears, tears of recognition, tears of I always knew, I always believed, even when I could not see it. Something in me knew this moment was coming. This is the final step. And I need you to understand what that means, because the final step is unlike any other step in the journey. It is the step that costs you everything you have left. It is the step that requires you to move when you are most exhausted. It is the step that demands faith when the evidence is most absent. But it is also the step after which nothing is ever the same again. Are you ready? Because heaven is. I want you to sit with something for a moment. Not analyze it, not debate it, not run it through the filter of everything you have been through and everything you have been told about yourself. Just sit with it. Because what I am about to say to you is either going to feel like the most liberating truth you have ever encountered, or it is going to feel like something too good to be true. And if it feels too good to be true, I want you to pay attention to that resistance. Because that resistance is not wisdom. That resistance is a wound. And wounds lie to us about what we deserve. You were chosen, not because of what you have accomplished, not because of how consistently you have shown up in your faith, not because you are the most disciplined, the most righteous, the most put together person in the room. You were chosen before any of those things were even possible, before you ever had the opportunity to earn anything or lose anything, before you ever made your first right decision or your first terrible one, before you knew what prayer was, before you understood what faith meant, before you had any concept of God at all. God already had a complete concept of you. And in that moment, before time had a name, He looked at everything you would become and everything you would struggle with and everything you would survive, and He placed His hand on your life and called you chosen. That is not a motivational statement. That is a theological reality that changes everything about how you are supposed to understand your life. Because if you were chosen before you were formed, then the things that have happened to you along the way, the failures, the detours, the seasons where you felt invisible and overlooked and passed over, none of those things have the power to unchoose you. You cannot lose what was assigned to you before you existed. You cannot disqualify yourself from a selection that was made before you ever had the chance to qualify. Think about how many years you have spent measuring your worthiness. How many hours you have invested in trying to calculate whether you deserve what you have been praying for. You look at your past and you see the mistakes and you think maybe that is why it has not come yet. Maybe God is waiting for me to be better. Maybe the promise is for people who have handled things more gracefully than I have. And I understand that kind of thinking. It comes from a genuine place of humility, but it is built on a completely wrong foundation, because your selection was never based on your performance. It was based on His purpose, and His purpose was established in eternity, long before your performance in time had any bearing on anything. There is a reason God told Jeremiah, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." He did not say before you proved yourself. He did not say before you demonstrated your consistency. He said before I formed you. The knowing came before the forming. The choosing came before the living. Your identity as a chosen one is not something you grew into. It is something you were born into. It is not a title you earned through spiritual achievement. It is an inheritance you received through divine intention. And here's what that means for right now, today, in this moment of your life where things may not look the way you believed they would. Your circumstances do not get to rewrite what was written in eternity. The difficulty of your current season does not have the authority to cancel what God authored before the foundation of the world. You are still chosen. You have always been chosen. I need you to understand something about the journey you have been on. Because there is a pattern in the way God moves, a pattern that most people miss because they are too close to their own pain to see it clearly. And when you miss this pattern, you make the most devastating mistake a believer can make at the most critical moment of their entire spiritual journey. You quit, you pull back, you lower your hands, you begin to negotiate with the idea of settling, and you do it not because you have lost faith entirely, but because you have misread what the warfare around you actually means. Here is what nobody told you. The enemy does not fight hardest at the beginning. He does not bring his greatest weapons out when you are just starting. When you first step out in faith, when you first declare your trust in God, when you first begin to move toward the promise, the opposition is real, but it is manageable. It is enough to slow you down, but not enough to stop you. And most people push through that initial resistance because the fire is fresh and the vision is clear and the energy of new beginnings carries them forward. But the closer you get to the finish line, the more violent the opposition becomes. And that is not an accident. That is strategy. The enemy is not threatened by where you started. He is terrified of where you are about to arrive. And so he reserves his most aggressive assignments, his most sophisticated attacks, his most relentless pressure for the final stretch, for the season right before the breakthrough, for the moment just before the door opens, for the chapter immediately preceding the one where everything changes. And that is exactly where many of you are right now. You are in the most violent stretch of your entire journey. And because it is so hard, because the resistance is so intense, because you are more exhausted now than you have ever been in your life, you have begun to interpret the warfare as evidence that God has stepped away. You have started to read the difficulty as divine disapproval. You have looked at how hard everything feels and concluded that maybe the promise was never really for you. But I want you to hear this with every part of your being. The intensity of the battle is not a sign that you are losing. It is a sign that you are winning. The enemy does not waste his best ammunition on people who are not going anywhere. He does not deploy his most sophisticated strategies against lives that pose no threat to his agenda. He fights hardest against the people who are closest to the very thing he cannot allow them to reach. And the fact that you are under the kind of pressure you are under right now tells me something very specific about where you are in this journey. You are close, dangerously, gloriously, irreversibly close. Think about the times in Scripture when God's people faced the most impossible circumstances. It was never at the beginning of the story. It was always right before the miracle. The Red Sea did not appear at the start of the Exodus. It appeared when Pharaoh's army was already behind them and there was nowhere left to run. The fire did not come for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego before they took their stand. It came when they had already committed to their position and there was no retreating. The stone was not rolled in front of the tomb at the beginning of the crucifixion. It came after everything looked finished, after hope appeared dead, after every disciple had concluded that it was over. God has a history of doing his greatest work in the moments that look most like defeat. He has a pattern of showing up most powerfully when human logic has exhausted every possible explanation for how things could still turn around. And that pattern is not coincidental. It is intentional, because God is not just interested in your miracle. He is interested in your testimony. He is building a story in your life that will require every chapter, including this brutal, exhausting, confusing one, to make complete sense. So I am asking you not to quit in the final step. I want to talk to you about the years that felt like nothing was happening. The years where you prayed the same prayers and believed the same promises and stood on the same scriptures and woke up every morning hoping that today would be the day something finally shifted, and it did not. Those years, because I know they are in the room with you right now. I know they follow you into your quiet moments. I know that when you are honest with yourself in the private spaces where you do not perform faith for anyone, those years carry a weight that is very difficult to explain to someone who has not lived through them. And the enemy has used those years against you in the most cruel way imaginable. He has taken the very seasons that God designed for your formation and twisted them into evidence of your abandonment. He has whispered into the silence of your waiting and told you that the silence means absence, that the delay means denial, that the years without visible movement mean that heaven is not moving at all. And because pain has a way of making lies sound reasonable, some of you have started to believe him. Not completely, not openly, but in the quiet, in the moments between your declarations of faith and your honest feelings, you have wondered if those years were simply lost. They were not lost. Not a single day, not a single tear, not a single moment of confusion or disappointment or aching hope deferred. Every bit of it was being used. God was not absent in your waiting. He was working in your waiting. And the distinction between those two things is everything. Here is what most people do not understand about the way God prepares his chosen ones. He does not simply prepare a blessing and then hand it to you. He prepares you to receive the blessing, and the preparation almost always takes longer than the blessing itself, because the preparation is the harder work. It is easy to give someone a gift. It is far more demanding to build in them the capacity to steward that gift without being destroyed by it. And God, who sees the end from the beginning, who knows not just what you need, but what you will need 5 years after you receive it. God was not going to release into your life what you were not yet built to carry. Think about what those waiting years actually did to you. Think about who you were when this season started and who you are now. You are not the same person. The pain broke things in you that needed to be broken. The silence developed in you an ability to trust that is only built in the absence of visible evidence. The disappointment stripped away layers of superficiality and left behind something truer, something deeper, something that cannot be shaken by circumstance because it was forged inside of it. You did not come out of those years weaker. You came out refined. You came out with a quality of faith that cannot be manufactured in comfortable seasons. God was surgical in your waiting. Every moment had a purpose. Every delay was a decision, not because he's cruel, but because he's thorough, because he loved you too much to give you something you would have dropped, because he knew the weight of what was coming, and he spent those years making sure you would have the shoulders for it. Your waiting was not punishment, it was preparation. And the difference between those two things is the difference between a life lived in bitterness and a life lived in expectation. There is a moment in every chosen person's life that changes everything. Not a moment of loud revelation, not a moment where the sky opens and an audible voice confirms what you have been hoping. It is quieter than that, more personal than that. It is the moment where something shifts on the inside, where a truth that has been circling the edges of your consciousness for years finally lands in the center of your spirit with the full weight of its reality. It is the moment where you stop questioning whether you are chosen and you simply know. And that moment, that precise, internal, almost imperceptible moment of recognition is not just a feeling. It is a spiritual event with real consequences in the invisible realm. Because here is what most people do not realize about identity and destiny. They are not passive realities that operate independently of your awareness of them. Your destiny does not simply unfold on a predetermined track, regardless of whether you know who you are. Your calling does not automatically manifest simply because it was written. There is a participation required, a recognition required. A moment where you look at your own life with spiritual eyes and say, I see what God sees. I believe what heaven has declared. I accept what was assigned before I was formed. And that moment of recognition is not the end of something. It is the beginning of everything. Think about what happened to every person in Scripture the moment they received a revelation of their own identity. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness as a shepherd. Not a chosen deliverer, not a leader of nations, just a man tending sheep in obscurity. And then came the burning bush. And in that moment, God did not give Moses new information about the world. He gave Moses a revelation of himself. I am who I am. And something in that encounter awakened in Moses a recognition of his own calling that had been buried under 4 decades of failure and displacement. And the moment he recognized it, the entire trajectory of his life changed. Not gradually, immediately. That is what recognition does. It does not slowly inch you toward your destiny. It accelerates you toward it. Because when you know who you are, you stop making decisions from a place of unworthiness. You stop shrinking back from rooms you were designed to fill. You stop apologizing for the space you occupy. You stop allowing the enemy to convince you that your seat at the table was a mistake. You walk differently. You speak differently. You respond to opposition differently. You pray differently, not with the desperate pleading of someone who hopes God might notice them, but with the bold authority of someone who knows they are already seen, already known, already included in the plan. And the enemy knows this. He understands the power of identity better than most believers do. That is why his primary strategy against chosen people is never to destroy them outright. It is to keep them ignorant of who they are, because a chosen person who does not know they are chosen is no threat to him. They live below their inheritance. They accept limitations that were never assigned to them. They carry burdens that were never meant for them. They stay in seasons that God long ago provided the key to leave, all because they never had the recognition moment that would have changed everything. But you are having that moment right now. This is it. This is the burning bush. Not a burning bush of fire and smoke, but a burning bush of truth, penetrating through every layer of doubt and disappointment and self-disqualification straight into the core of who you were made to be. And heaven is watching to see what you do with this moment. Because recognition without response is incomplete. When you recognize who you are, something is required of you, not perfection, not immediate transformation, just agreement, just a willingness to say, yes, I believe it, I receive it, I will stop living beneath what was written over me before I was born,